Boeing 747 which had 524 people on board. At 24,000 feet, the tail of the aircraft suddenly separates in the air. The flight crew had neither the controls left nor the direction. There was neither oxygen nor air pressure in the cabin. But despite that, how do they keep the aircraft in the air for the next 45 minutes? This is the story of human courage, engineering failure, and a flight that had no control left. And that flight was Japan Air 123. Welcome back to Orbit Tales video. On 12th of August 1985, a Boeing 747 of Japan Airlines was offboarding passengers at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. It was supposed to take off again exactly an hour later and go to Osaka. Thousands of people travel from Tokyo to Osaka every day, but today was a little extra busy because people were going to their hometowns for the Japanese holiday season, Obon. After cleaning the aircraft at Haneda Airport, 509 passengers and 15 crew members were on board in Japan Air 123. For the crew, it was a routine flight, but the passengers did not know that the aircraft they were going to travel on was a victim of a long-standing weakness, a horrific problem that neither the pilots nor the flight engineer knew about. Due to the busy schedule, this special Boeing 747 was going to be the sixth flight of the day. If we talk about 3 cockpit crews, the 49-year-old Captain Masami Takahama would lead the flight, which had a total of 12,000 hours of experience. The first officer was 39-year-old Yutaka Sasaki, who was already in the process of being promoted to captain, and this flight was the most important for his promotion. They had a total of 3,900 hours of experience. The third cockpit crew was 46-year-old flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda, whose job was to sit behind the pilot seats and keep an eye on the technical problems of the aircraft. Looking at the ability of the cockpit crew, it would not be wrong to say that the lives of 509 passengers are in complete safe hands. But like the crew, is this aircraft also worth it or not? We'll find out in a little while. At 6:04 p.m. in the evening, the doors of Japan Air 123 were closed, and the pilot started taxiing the aircraft to runway 15L. It was going to be a very short flight from Tokyo to Osaka, just 1 hour and 12 minutes. That is, by the time the aircraft reaches its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet, it will be ready to take off. The weather in Tokyo was clear, but today there were many thunderstorms in Japan. Because of this, the pilot was instructed that he would not go directly from Tokyo to Osaka, but would go over the ocean. Now on runway 15L, Japan Air 123 was ready for takeoff. At 6:12 p.m., after getting permission from the control tower, the pilot lifted the thrust levers of the aircraft and successfully took off. So far, everything that happened was absolutely normal. But just 12 minutes after takeoff, there is a loud noise inside the aircraft over Sagami Bay, and there is a hole in the back of the tail. The excitement of the passengers, who were still very excited about going home, turns into fear as soon as they blink. Because of the hole, there was a lot of noise in the cabin, and loose things quickly started pulling towards the hole. It all happened so fast that it was difficult to even get an idea of what happened. The noise was so loud that it was heard in the cockpit as well. This is how the noise was felt in the cockpit voice recorder. It is important to note that as the plane goes to altitude, the oxygen level begins to decline, and the oxygen level also decreases. To counter this, artificial pressure is filled inside the cabin, which is almost equal to the atmospheric pressure of the ground, which means that the pressure outside is less at 24,000 feet, and the pressure inside the cabin is more. And this extra air pressure is constantly applying pressure from the inside on the cabin walls. The cabin of the plane is kept completely airtight, so that this artificial pressure does not leak in any way. But if even a small part of the cabin is weak, air pressure can tear that place apart and create a hole. Because of this, the artificial pressure of the cabin will end, and the passenger's health can deteriorate. In addition to this, due to the decrease in oxygen level, it can be difficult to breathe. Something similar happened in Japan Air 123, but both the pilots do not know about it yet. They were heard talking to each other in the cockpit voice recorder, in which they sometimes talked about the breaking of the landing gear door, and sometimes they felt that maybe the sound came from the engine. But the reality was that the rearmost part of the fuselage was separated from the plane, and it also took away the rudder. Due to the explosion of the tail of the fuselage, the pressure in the cabin will not be able to be maintained. But the rudder, which is attached to the tail, means that the plane is now going out of the control of both the pilots. The job of the rudder is to control the yaw movement of the aircraft, When any aircraft takes a turn, this movement is called roll movement. The movement of the nose up or nose down is called pitch, whereas the horizontal direction of the nose is called yaw movement. In simple words, Japan Air 123 will not be able to turn properly due to the lack of rudder at about 24,000 feet, nor will it be able to align itself with the runway while landing. But the more dangerous thing is that both the pilots do not know that the rudder is out. The aircraft is no longer stable as before, and it starts moving left and right on its own. It was not possible for the autopilot to control it. On the ground below, a person saw the movement of the aircraft and felt something wrong and took a photo. In this photo, it is clearly visible that the rudder part is missing from the tail. Both the pilots still understood something that was heard while announcing the cabin crew, who were instructing the passengers to fasten their belts on their seats. When the captain in the cockpit felt something was wrong, he first set the transponder frequency to 7703, which is a universal distress signal. That is, now all the control towers will know that Japan Air 123 is in an emergency situation. The captain decided to land the plane back in Tokyo. But is the plane capable of doing this or not? First of all, he told the control tower about the emergency situation and asked for permission to land back in Tokyo. The control tower gave the captain permission to land in Tokyo at a 90-degree turn. The first officer who was sitting on the controls turned the plane to the right at an angle of exactly 40 degrees. But both the pilots were even more scared to see that the plane's angle was much higher than 40 degrees. At this point, the captain was shouted at by the first officer to reduce the bank angle, but the angle did not go down at all. The co-pilot tried again and again, but the plane was not responding to any of his inputs. Meanwhile, the flight engineer told both the pilots that the hydraulic pressure was decreasing rapidly. And as soon as he saw it, the hydraulic pressure came to zero. This was the point when all three crew members in the cockpit found out that the plane was now out of their control. For those who don't know, keep telling them that all the controls of the plane, including ailerons for left-right turn, elevators for pitch, flaps to slow down, are impossible to move with hands, especially when the wind is blowing at 1,000 km/h. That's why they are moved with the help of hydraulic pressure. And the tail of Japan Air 123 had also torn some hydraulic pipes with it. This was the reason that now the entire hydraulic pressure of the aircraft was over, and the cockpit controls were like a showpiece. At an altitude of 24,000 feet, Japan Air 123 had encountered many problems. The cabin pressure was over, the oxygen masks came out, the hydraulic pressure was over, and its controls were lost. And the most dangerous thing is that now the passengers and pilots began to have hypoxia due to low pressure. Hypoxia is the condition when there is confusion due to low oxygen levels in the body. It becomes difficult to decide. The movements become slow and even the person becomes unconscious. Meanwhile, the cabin crew was announced to wear oxygen masks. If you remove the oxygen mask, put it on your head. Now, Japan Air 123 was scaring the passengers by moving the roll badly. Now only one thing was left with both the pilots, and that was the engine controls. The captain tried to remove the plane from the roll by using only the engine controls. If the plane has to be turned right, then the power of the engines on the left side will have to be increased, and if it has to be turned left, then the power of the engines on the right side will have to be increased. Similarly, when the plane will bank to the right in the roll movement, then only the power of the right engines can be increased for a certain time, and it can be straightened again. Using this method, the pilots were able to control the plane's roll movement to a large extent. Now their only mission was to get the plane back to Tokyo Airport as soon as possible. But before that, the plane will have to be brought close to the ground so that the pressure in the cabin can increase. For this purpose, elevators are usually used, which are now useless because of the lack of hydraulic pressure. Therefore, the captain gave the idea of lowering the landing gear. Landing gear creates extra drag in the plane, which can slow down the speed. But these landing gears also open with hydraulic pressure. Therefore, the captain decided to open the landing gear at his own weight. And fortunately, they opened. Now at 6:45 a.m., Japan Air 123 takes a circular flight over the city of Otsuki, and its altitude is from 24,000 feet to 13,500 feet, which was a great success for the pilots. Pressure and oxygen in the cabin both get better, but the danger is still there. They had to take a right turn from here to Tokyo, but it was very difficult for the pilots to turn the plane only through engine controls. If they had increased the thrust of the engine, the nose of the plane would have been much higher, which was also reducing the speed. and if the speed is too low, the plane can stall and fall to the ground. Unwillingly, the plane entered the mountainous area of Japan. It seemed an impossible task to turn the plane without controls to Tokyo at low altitude. At 6:48 a.m., the captain was told by the first officer to turn right. There is a mountain ahead, but maybe it was not possible to take such a fine turn only with the help of engine controls. At this time, various alarms were heard in the cockpit. Unwillingly, the plane had reached only 6,800 feet above the mountain range, far from Tokyo. A few minutes later, at 6:54 p.m., the captain's hoarse voice was clearly visible from his voice. And then finally, after 2 minutes, some such sounds were recorded in the cockpit. Japan Air's plane crashed into a mountain due to low altitude while turning. Only 4 people were able to survive in this incident, who were sitting on the left side in the center of the cabin. The rest of the crew and passengers lost their lives in this horrific incident. The investigation found that 7 years ago, while landing, the tail of this plane collided with the runway. After that, the plane remained grounded for several weeks and Boeing technicians kept repairing it. In the investigation, it was found that the technicians had installed the tail splice plate in the wrong way. Investigators calculated and said that this faulty repair cabin can only be pressurized up to 11,000 cycles. While Japan Air 123 had completed 12,500 cycles in the same condition, and coincidentally, this pressure could not be tolerated on the same day. After this incident, the investigators spent 4 different pilots in the same state in the flight simulator. But all 4 pilots crashed the plane, and no pilot was able to keep the plane in the air for as long as Japan Air 123 stayed in the air. This is quite surprising because the pilots in the simulator had 2 very big benefits. One, they already knew what the problem was, and the other, they were at peace that their lives would not be lost. Looking at these conditions, it would not be wrong to say that both pilots of Japan Air 123 tried their best to control the plane and kept it in the air for 45 minutes. I hope you will like and share this video of Orbit Tales. Thank you very much for your lovely comments. See you in the next great video.